Long Voyage Back, Part 43, page 296. Frank, bone-weary, nevertheless staggered out of his berth when Tony told him there was some trouble between Neil and a woman. Confused, half asleep, he felt an instant flash of anger, convinced that Neil was hitting on Jean, but before he could ask for further clarification, Tony had disappeared. Slipping on a pair of shorts and taking a flashlight, he stumbled up out of his cabin and went aft to Neil's cabin. He knocked on the hatch, then slid it open. Flashing his light down the ladder, he was startled to see Katya's bare legs and then her questioning face. She pulled a cover over the rest of her body. Frank's first take was relief. So Neil was bawling Katya, he thought. He was glad. But when he saw the man in the berth was Ollie, snoring peacefully, Frank blinked uncertainly. I'm looking for Neil, he said. Katya blinked up at him. He went topside to check on the anchor, she replied. Oh. Frank closed the hatch and walked into the wheelhouse. Have you seen Neil? He asked Macklin, who was sitting against the mizzenmast with his feet stretched out on the settee. Tony said something about some problem. He's in bed, said Macklin. No, I just checked there, Frank said. In bed with Jean, said Macklin indifferently. Frank stayed where he was, turning the light off to leave him in relative darkness. He felt fear, unexpected and powerful fear. He walked reluctantly to the port cabin, hesitated, and then banged his fist down 3 times on the sliding hatch, like a judge gavelling for order. There was no response from inside. In a small burst of breeze, Vagabond swung slowly off to port in the darkness, swinging her on anchor. Frank hammered 3 more times on the hatch. What is it? He heard Jean finally say. I'm looking for Neil, Frank said harshly, even as he entertained a strong momentary hope that Macklin was wrong. Then he heard the sound of someone landing with a thump on the cabin floor. He waited. In another few seconds the hatch slid forward and away from him. A figure came quickly up the ladder and stopped on the top step, 3 feet away. It was Neil. After a pause he came out of the cockpit and confronted Frank. In the wheelhouse behind them Macklin was turning up the kerosene lantern, and its dim glow fell across Neil's bare chest. He was wearing only his swim trunks. Frank stared at him. Neil returned his gaze steadily. Then Frank saw on his shoulder a long black strand of Jean's hair. You goddamn son of a bitch, he said automatically. No, Frank, said Neil. I'm sorry. Frank swung his fists with the same instinctive rage that had brought out the curse. The blow struck Neil solidly in the side of the head, sending him reeling to his right and tumbling into the cockpit seat. There he sat for a moment, stunned. His body turned sideways to Frank, touching the left side of his face. You heartless, selfish son of a bitch, Frank said, his fist clenched at his side. Neil looked up at him, anger in his eyes too. Selfish, Frank? Not heartless, he said. How dare you take advantage of that woman when she... Frank wanted to say, she's mine. But the words stuck in his throat, and he felt an urge to cry. I'm sorry, Neil said, but sometimes something becomes more important than loyalty to a friend. A goddamn fuck, he shouted at Neil. Neil looked up at him sadly. Yes, he answered quietly. Frank lunged at Neil to grab him by the throat, but this time Neil fell to one side to avoid the charge, and grabbed Neil's left arm, pulled him over and sent him crashing into the back of the cockpit seat. Frank turned and reached for Neil again, but he pulled himself away. Blindly, Frank got up to come at him a 3rd time. Look, Frank, this is ridiculous. As Frank swung at him, Neil ducked under the blow and slammed into Frank's chest, sending him back against the cockpit seat. Frank crushed hard against it by Neil's weight. The wind was knocked out of him, leaving him momentarily dazed. He felt Neil push himself to his feet and step back again, into the middle of the cockpit. Both men were gasping for air. Frank looked up at him, feeling both a hatred that seemed to be unwinding out of control and a sad little boy impulse to cry, as if Neil were the neighbourhood bully, picking on him. Look, I know, Neil began. You ever go down in her cabin again and I'll kill you. Frank stood uncertainly a few feet away, his fists clenching and unclenching at his side, sweat matting the hairs on his chest. Don't say that, Frank, Neil said softly. You don't. I said it! I mean it, he shouted back. Stop betraying me! Neil flinched at these words. Jean appeared behind him in a cabin entranceway, looking at Frank with a pained, frightened expression. Frank's heart ached for her now. He wanted to protect her, to care for her. It's not Neil you should be angry with, he heard her say to him. "Damn it, Jean, how could you?" he asked huskily. Again he wanted to cry. "Get below, Jean," Neil said, pushing her back with his left arm. Frank saw now that Katya, wearing Neil's robe, was standing in the wheelhouse beside Macklin and Tony, watching. And Jim and Lisa had returned too, and were also staring at him. He felt beaten. Slowly he brought himself into a sitting position. He began, but had to clear his throat. "Have I made myself clear?" He said to Neil, with as much coldness as he could command, the sounds coming out huskily like the words of a dying man. "Yes," said Neil. "Good." The images of the others were blurred, barely distinguishable. Later he realised that he must have been crying. As he moved past Neil, shoved himself between Katya and Tony, and returned to his cabin. He had lost everything. Guiltily, unhappily, Jim and Lisa escaped Vagabond with Katya in the theory to barter for some additional food out of a commune at Salt Point, but in reality to get away from the conflicts they couldn't handle. They sailed with Oscar, Greg and Arnie, and 2 young women from Scorpio. One was Oscar's girlfriend, Janice, a plumpish woman of 30 with short curly brown hair. The other was a slender, nervous girl named Mirabai, who was vaguely connected with Arnie. Both women, and the men too, he realised, struck Jim as frighteningly passive and apathetic. None of them seemed to have any ideas about how they might survive what was happening. They were vaguely hopeful that the commune might feed and take care of them, and only Oscar seemed interested in joining Vagabond and sailing further south. Greg and Arnie, often stoned on grass, seemed indifferent even to the prospects of the commune. The old racing ship moved sluggishly, and Jim noticed how tentatively Oscar and her crew handled her. He was worried by the small anchor they threw overboard, especially when they paid out so little scope that a fresh breeze might well blow them out to sea. Oscar explained that their big anchor had been stolen. When Jim suggested it might be advisable to put out another 100 feet of anchor line, they thought it was a swell idea. By the time the 3 from Vagabond rowed ashore at Salt Point with Oscar and Janice, it was 4 in the afternoon. Then, as they were pulling the dinghy up onto the beach, Greg's shouts from Scorpio indicated that, even with the additional scope, Scorpio's anchor was dragging with the rising wind. Oscar and Jim left the 3 girls and began rowing full speed back to the sloop. The 3 women were left to investigate on their own. Salt Point was a barren peninsula stretching out from one of the 3 white enclaves that still survived on St. Thomas. It had become the unofficial home of a small group of homeless whites and blacks. As Lisa followed Janice and Katya into the low shrubs on their way across the peninsula towards the cove where Janice said the barter boat was reported to come, she moved reluctantly, unhappy at being separated from Jim. On the other hand, she needed to be away from the tensions of the Vagabond and looked forward to checking out the commune. Big Robbie, the leader, preached that the end of the world was upon them, just 3 more weeks or something like that, and that they should all take joy in the last days. When they were halfway across the peninsula, they saw in the distance 3 or 4 rather dilapidated, one-story wooden structures and some people. As they came nearer, Lisa saw that 2 of the women in one group were bare-breasted, and a man leaning back against the wall of one of the shacks was completely naked. Several people were smoking, and when they arrived at the clearing, she could smell the sweet odour of pot. A man with a bushy blonde beard and long hair tied in a bun behind his head emerged from the shack near them. He was wearing cut-off jeans. "Hey, welcome. Good morning, sisters," he said. "I'm Thunder. Don't think I've seen you around here before." He grinned at Katya. "We're just visiting," she said. "We heard good things about you," Janice added. "Thought we'd check it out." "That's great, man, great," Thunder said, smiling, and looking from one to the other, and then back at Katya. "We're getting dozens of new people every day. The last days are here, and I guess everyone's finally learning to groove." No one responded immediately to this, and in the pause Lisa introduced everyone to Thunder. A naked white man and a black girl walked by holding hands, the girl's long hair falling down her back. Lisa noticed how skinny they both were, and that the girl's bony bottom was covered with a light coating of sand. "We're not much on clothes here," Thunder went on, smiling. "Everyone's free to do what they want. Berast or tuxedo, it's all cool here." "But Berast is cooler," Katya commented, and Thunder laughed, reached out a bony hand to pat her on the shoulder. "Hey, you're right there," he said, "especially in this heat." "Is there some place we could get something to eat and drink?" Lisa asked. Thunder's face clouded. There's a cistern about 200 yards past the house. Just follow the path, but it's getting low, so we have to ration. Our next meal's about dusk. Only an hour, but I doubt the girls are back from buying the fruit and fish. We'll survive, said Lisa, tossed her dark hair away from her face. Yeah, said Thunder, looking at the three of them with a frown. Hey, you know, I don't want to preach, but you cats ought to loosen up a bit. Enjoy yourselves. This is the Peninsula of Love, man, and Robbie's message is that we should joy in these last days. You folks appear a little down. Loosen up, man. Do what you will, but joy. They stared at him. We're a little done in by our sale, said Janice. Sure, man, I dig that, but you got to know that within a month the whole earth will be destroyed, Thunder elaborated, his bearded face strangely expressionless as he spoke. Things don't look too good, Lisa agreed tentatively. You got to joy, man. These are the last days. Let go. He smiled at them and gave Janice an awkward hug. If you want to get stoned, the communal pot supply is in the first shack here. I'm afraid it's rationed too. No thanks, said Lisa. Joy, brothers and sisters, Thunder pronounced, opening his arms in a belated welcome. Joy in all you do. The last days are here. Joy to you too, Lisa said shyly in a soft voice as Thunder strode away after two women who were following a path on to the left.